Man, just when you thought spring games were over and we were going to struggle to find headlines, Brendan Sorsby, he opens up a can of worms and always bet on yourself, I guess.
Welcome back to First and Short, ladies and gentlemen. This is your first place to get short bits of college football news and analysis. Today's episode is, as always, hosted by my co-host Aaron and myself, Mashfik. Today, Aaron alluded to the big bombshell news that dropped about Brendan Sorsby. But before we get into that and any other spring game stuff, I just want to plug our show. Please follow us here on YouTube. Most of our viewers don't follow us yet, so just hit the subscribe button, and then you'll continue to get our content on your feed throughout the rest of the year. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify. We sound great in the car. I listen to my episode all the time on the way to work, so that's all good there. Aaron, like you mentioned, right? Brendan Sorsby, he turns himself in and removes himself from the Texas Tech football team after transferring there from Indiana to Cincinnati for a couple of years, and now here he hadn't even gotten to play one down yet at Texas Tech, but he has removed himself due to his betting or his gambling addictions, really, and betting on his own team. So we'll get into more of that in a little bit. Notre Dame and Oregon, on another note, and a few other teams, they wrapped up their spring games, but those are the two that we're going to cover today. They wrapped up so this kind of wraps up what I call a return to normalcy kind of spring game season. I'll talk more about that when we get into that section, but that's kind of where we're at. So, Aaron, before I get into the Brendan Sorsby, kind of information, obviously, he has officially stepped away from the team. He enters into a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. Apparently, he was betting on his team to win back when he was riding the bench as a freshman at Indiana. He was betting on baseball games when he was at Cincinnati. Apparently, Cincinnati even knew about it. Today, I saw something. Where's the tweet? Hold on, I got it right here. Sources have reviewed the betting data that dating back to 2022, Brendan Sorsby plays more than 10,000 wagers, and at one point was averaging 20 bets a day. He was doing this across multiple states, multiple apps, all that sort of stuff. So, we can obviously go a little bit deeper. Any initial thoughts from your end before we get into that?
Yeah, first thoughts. What a perfect shitstorm, right? So
Yeah.
you got the presence of the NIL era, right? You got the presence of being able to bet a little bit more legally across the nation, right? Then you're able to
Yep.
bet on college football athletes and their statistics. So it's just wow. A snowball effect of things that are very, very, very new, right? I will give him that credit from everything you've told me so far. These things are going to have to be figured out, right? We've, in a way, the system has done it to themselves. They unleashed the beast of just free roam, and they're going to have to make little modifications, amendments, something to control this better. From what I've heard so far.
Yeah, and look, I know we're making small jokes here and there. Gambling is an addiction. It's a true mental, debilitating kind of thing. So I don't want to make light of it. We talk about sports gambling here on this show just a little bit. We make it a point not to make it the main point, because I understand that it can be it can just take over your life. And that is the angle that Texas Tech is kind of taking with him to make the NCAA realize that this is a mental kind of disability addiction thing that he's going through, and that's why he's going into this treatment. He's trying to get better. They're not trying to make this into some violation thing or whatever. They're trying to make this he's actually sick. But there's a lot of players here, and it'll get weird. In the open, Aaron, you mentioned there's a can of worms. Listen, we haven't even gotten into Sorsby. He's he was going to be a good player this year. I'm sure he was, with Texas Tech kind of on the map now. I'm sure he was going to be talked about. But in reality, we have across all sports, right? We haven't really had a star player get caught yet. I don't think, not an NBA, NFL, whatever. We haven't had a coach get caught yet. You better know that that's happening, right? But we just haven't even gotten there yet. So this is the tip of the iceberg, I think. So it really is a can of worms. But my question, Aaron, if I want to ask you something, Sorsby, he was betting on his own team to win in a game where he knows he's not even playing. Is this so? Right now, his eligibility is in question. He might be just done with NCAA football, because that's not allowed. Do you feel like, you kind of touched on this, like everything, all the floodgates kind of opened at once? NIL, sports betting allowed everywhere. Is this ban a little bit too archaic for 2026? Is this like a integrity of the game protection, or does the NCAA, they don't even want to like go down this route. They don't want to like leave the door cracked open even an inch. Like, what are your thoughts there? Like, is this an appropriate response in 2026?
Sure, sure. So I think how the NCAA is going to react, I think it was a smart move for Sorsby to uh, admit himself into some rehabilitation center. Right? They obviously are going to see that he's going to take it seriously and make it a priority, even stepping away from the program. I worry that they are going to have that permanent ban on him to just make an example and take control of it the best way they can right now, since they know it's probably happening in other places and they don't want it to get out of control. Right? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, so let's tie this back to like Texas Tech. How does this affect, them moving forward? Just as a recap, like Brendan Sorsby's like elite 2025 season, he had 36 touchdowns, 27 were passing, 9 was rushing. He was third in the country in total touchdowns. He had a perfect game against Northwestern State where he went 15 for 15. He had a almost 100 QBR. So that's the second highest in Big 12 history, and he held the highest he held the longest active streak in the FBS for games with 2+ touchdowns. Um, he was a very consistent and good player. Hopefully, Texas Tech was hoping that would translate there. So right now, with him, towing the line of possibly, losing all of his remaining eligibility, even if he's reinstated, he's looking at a minimum 50% season suspension. So with Sorsby out, Texas Tech, they're looking at Will Hammond. He was there last year, but he is coming off a torn ACL. So it's almost like, they're trying to build off of last year's momentum. They seem like a playoff lock. Now they're in a quarterback crisis, obviously. And one other thing I just wanted to point out, there was a $1 million lawsuit from Cincinnati because he breached his NIL contract by transferring. Not the only, contract violation that we heard from this last off season, but between the legal fees and the rehab and whatnot, this is a total collapse of a very high value kind of NIL brand for this guy here.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts on how this type of thing could be fixed? I have an idea. I want you to go first, though.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna let you say your idea, but I think the fix is gonna come first. Initially, it's gonna come naturally, right? Teams
Yeah.
who are recruiting and teams who are getting these players out of the transfer portal, they're going to do a deeper dig into these players before they just offer them money and say, "Hey, come to my program." Right? We've seen the different stories of players, one not being loyal if they transfer to your program after a year. They may go to see where the next biggest pot of money is, but also we've seen players, go to a school and not even complete a season there, right? We saw the tampering that took place with Clemson. You know, uh, Another example, we saw Damon Williams, right? Uh, Went from Georgia to Missouri, Missouri to
Damon
Miami.
Wilson.
Yep, Wilson. Yep. Um, so I think it's gonna course correct itself and how coaches approach players in the portal. They're gonna, maybe dig through the surface a little bit more and understand, okay, what does your current contract look like, and how are you really gonna pan out as a long term player for this program? Because you know, hoops hitting the fan before the season even starts.
Yeah, character evaluation is definitely gonna have to be in effect. And like apparently they already, like the tweet that I read out, right? They looked into his account. Um, they looked at his data, so clearly somebody has access to your data if they want it. So that
Mhm.
needs to be through a proper channel, to like track all that sort of stuff. What I was gonna say is my solution is to go extremely in one direction, but the direction you're not thinking. I think that every player should be required to bet on their team to win. At least like whatever that percentage is, like 5% of your NIL deal has to go to you have to bet on your team to win. So now every player has money on the line every single game they play. I bet they play harder if they have to do that.
Wow.
That is in no way ever going to happen, but that is my fix,
Mhm.
and I bet that would be very entertaining to watch.
Yeah, yeah. I know I've heard you talk about it on the show before, you know, potential auditing going on in NCAA, I think with EY, right? That's
Deloitte
Deloitte.
is auditing all the NIL deals over a dollar amount. Yeah.
Could it get super invasive to where they're, I don't know, they have a chance to, get into the pockets and maybe a controlled bank account for these players?
So I don't think so. So I used to work at EY, and they used to audit us. Um, they would audit us because they didn't want us investing in companies that we worked with. So
Mhm.
total independence is what they called it. Deloitte does the same thing. But I don't see why the NCAA or a school or something be like, we're going to audit our players to make sure that no one's gambling. Like we can just look into um, your tax returns or your bank account, whatever. Like I never got audited, so I don't know all the steps of it, but
Mhm.
that can happen. And I think that's totally fair, I think,
Mhm.
because they want to protect the sanctity of the sport. That's just something you're going to have to agree with. I think that's a good route that they could take. But let's move on. I think we've spent enough time on this guy. I think his career is probably more likely done, and he might have to enter the supplemental draft for NFL. In which case, then NFL GMs can decide were his few years in college good enough to join a team. Then, so anyway, there were some. Moving along, there were some spring games that we watched over the weekend. Aaron, why don't you start us off? What team do you want to talk to us about?
Sure, sure. So yeah, let's talk about the Oregon Ducks. And talk about some of the key points from their game that took place this past Saturday. Um, First thing I want to talk about, is the strengths that I really saw from the team. If I had to, you know, mimic or talk about anything that they, I guess, look very similar to, it's gonna have to be the Georgia Bulldogs. I consider them like the Western Georgia team, right? You know, first things first, it's that defensive line depth, right? They are almost comically deep. They recorded 10 sacks. I know it was just a spring game, but still, they were getting back there in the backfield fast. Even backup players like Aiden Breland, he's a 6'5", labeled as a monster, right? And he'd be able to start elsewhere. Um, Another thing that I'm looking at is that quarterback room. I think that's another strength for
Oh
the
yeah,
team. You know, analysts are calling it. Some are calling it the best quarterback room in the country. You got Dante Moore. He's an experienced leader, led you really far. And then out of the portal, you get another guy who was a star for his collegiate team, humble enough to be the backup, right? Dylan Raiola. He even changed his number, right? And as the future,
yeah, I was gonna say typically you see a team have good quarterbacks in one room, one leaves, and then becomes a starter at another school. I can't think of another school right now that had a starter at another school come in and is the backup. So there's a lot of talent there. So you said the analysts are calling it the best QB room. I think so.
yeah, yeah, 100%, right? So, these guys, they're both two potential top 10 NFL picks, probably in different classes, in the same room, learning from each other, getting better with each other every day. So it's good. It's going to be exciting for that
Yeah.
offensive core. Speaking of the offensive core, you have that wide receiver tandem. You got the duo Evan Stewart and Dorian Moore, right? They're projected to be the best 1-2 combo at receiver in college football, offering the explosiveness that they kind of lacked in the the pass game in 2025. So they should be there to cover that little bit of ground they needed to make up for. So yeah, again, offensive explosion, and then having that starts at the defensive line. I think those are the strengths of the team that I see so far. Um,
Excellent, excellent.
yeah.
What do you see if you had to pick some weaknesses? What did you see from this team on Saturday?
So to counter, that strong defensive line we saw, you got to think about, okay, well, what does that say about your offensive line and their continuity, right? Um,
Yeah,
they struggled significantly. They gave up double-digit sacks in the spring game, which is never a good look to in terms of protecting your star quarterback or backs. Um, and While some of this was, attributed to the touch to sack rules of the spring game scrimmage.
yeah,
The unit, is largely brand new, and they were at times manhandled by the defensive front. So it's just something you got to look for and tune up, fine tune as you got this whole off season to really find your weak points and work on them. Another concern is going to have to be their offensive schemes and game plans. The tendencies can sometimes seem too predictable. Uh, During the 2025 season and parts of the spring game, they were heavily relied on those short dink and dunk passes, and then the run game, right? Um,
yeah,
when you lean on that a little too much and you face a really, really good team, you fail to like stretch those elite defenses when it matters most, and they can kind of box you in.
yeah.
So that
It's Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting that the Oregon offense, as a whole, not including I mean, including the offensive line, but despite them, uh, Dante Moore still looked great. I feel like the biggest opportunity for this team to take that next step will be how he is, right? So, what are your thoughts on that whole meeting of Oregon's success and how Dante Moore is going to do this year?
Yeah, so you got a guy who was projected to be the number 2 quarterback taken in the NFL draft, and he said, "No, I wanna spend another year in college and develop." If he just gets, I don't know, 5% better, 10% better this year in his decision making, his calmness under pressure, which he should because he's a guy who was in, the biggest games of the year. He played the national championship team, what, twice?
Yeah,
Um, you know, he will be a Heisman, candidate finalist, right? Um He now has an arsenal of weapons that he didn't necessarily have at his previous stops, and maybe not even last year at Oregon. That he has now. So the potential is there. Speaking of those weapons, I think another opportunity that could help him in his Heisman campaign and just help the offense be even more explosive is the new tight end, Jamar Johnson, right? He looks very exceptional in the red zone, not only as a blocker, but he's filling in that massive void that was left by the departure, of Terrence Ferguson and Kenyon Sadiq. I think he was a tight end that went in the first round in the draft this year, I
mm-hmm.
think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
he's got big shoes to fill, but I think he'll fit in well, and he'll help disperse that ball and maybe get stretch those elite defenses like they need to be stretched, right? Yeah.
gotcha. I
Mhm.
don't have Oregon's schedule pulled up. I'm doing that now. But what would you say would be the red flags or the threats to derail this season? I mean, they go to Ohio State. I don't see Indiana on this list, but they do go to USC. But other than that, maybe other than scheduling, where do you see threats for this team's success this year?
Yeah, I mean, even though Indiana's not on that schedule, right? I feel like we just saw a complete collapse of the Oregon team that we saw the rest of, compared to that one game we saw in the playoffs, the rest of the season just didn't make sense compared to that one game. If you watch that game alone and then you
Yeah,
watch the rest of the season, you'd be like, okay, these are two different teams. So I think that the key there is going to be ensuring that coaches keep their players composed and adjust to those in-game scenarios and situations that are high stakes, right? Um, they got outplayed, but they also got outcoached that game, right? So it's in order
Mm-hmm.
to, not implode and have those derailing moments, it's going to take consistency at every level. So that's the player level and the coach level. Uh, the other threat that could, potentially derail their season, while that roster is deep, you know, the the health the healthiness of that team, it heavily relies on Decorian Moore. He's returning from I think a tendon injury, and then of course Evan Stewart, right? If the injury bug, if it hits that receiver room again, they may revert to that stagnant offense that's kind of one dimensional and not able to be a deep threat like they need to be. So they got to stay
Yeah.
healthy, and they really have to be strategists this year.
Yeah. I mean, injury can be a threat to any team, but I think specifically, you're mentioning those two guys because so much of that offense is going to depend on how successful they are. And like you said, Decorian Moore's coming back from an injury. So, understand that that's a justifiable threat there to Oregon.
Hmm.
Any final thoughts before we move on? I think Oregon's in a good spot to like make a deep run in the. I think they're a good playoff team again. Um, but
Yeah.
any additional thoughts from your end?
Yeah, you were reading that schedule. You said no Indiana. Do they have Ohio State on there?
Yeah, so they go like just top to bottom. I'm just gonna name the big teams. Like they're playing at USC. They play at Illinois, at Ohio State. Michigan's coming there, and then they end the year with Washington. So those are some of the big hitters.
Okay. I mean, the odds sound like they're in their favor still to be a playoff contender and a good playoff team, but I'm interested to see, are they going to get over that hump to, be a college football national championship, team, or a
Yeah,
team that's going to win their conference championship this year.
yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. Sounds good. I wanted to talk about the team that wears the golden helmets, Notre Dame,
Mm.
right? So they had their blue and gold game over the weekend. I think I'll start with their strength. It's going to be CJ Carr. I didn't have the utmost confidence in him last year. He was a freshman. I think the team kind of was like that too. They had two NFL, running backs on their team, Jeremiah Love and I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but they had him, right? And that was the offense. Right now, I don't think CJ Carr is gonna get to be able to be a game manager. He's gonna have to be a playmaker,
Yeah.
right? So, uh, and I think he has the capability of do that to do that, and that's why I'm putting him as the strength of this team. He finished last year with 2,700 yards, 24 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. So that's a good way to start your freshman career, and a good place to leverage into your sophomore kind of campaign. He's actually entering into this season in the spring right now as the Heisman favorite. And he proved that he can really like drive the team, drive the bus. He had a 43-yard game-winning drive at the end of the game. I think the defensive line is another strength on this team. They've got dudes on there. Boubacar Traore, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's looking like a player who's going to be primed to break out. And then they got this 5-star freshman, Rodney Dunham. 5-star freshman, like I said, he looks like he's going to be a day one starter. He he looked good in that game. So excited to hear his name and watch his play throughout this year. But yeah, I think CJ Carr can take this team at least to the playoffs because they didn't make it last year. But I think CJ Carr can take this team to the playoffs this year.
Okay. Okay. That sounds good. Are there any roadblocks or any things that could potentially, be a point of weakness for the team?
Yeah, I mean, just mention you lose your whole offense was predicated on how your two running backs was doing last year, right?
Yeah.
And so the room now, if you could look up the other running backs name, I keep
Yeah.
forgetting it.
So it's
Um,
Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price.
there
That's
we go. Yeah, I just couldn't think of the name, Jadarian Price. So yeah. Anyway, right now, they have a lot of experience in the backfield. It's deep, but the room is very young. As sometimes that happens, right? Certain rooms just uh, based on how you recruit, how people leave the program, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so you're transitioning from NFL caliber starters to Anais Williams and Jonas Walton, which are probably going to be names that you haven't heard if you're not a Notre Dame fan. But you're losing the you're losing the home run threat kind of, and you're going to get more of a grinded out style of running back play, especially early in the season. So that's when CJ Carr is going to have to really shine as well when your running backs are struggling. Um, yeah, I think they already have some injuries in the secondary. Luckily they were able to get Jaden Sanders. He's a Michigan transfer. Michigan has been producing good secondary play over the last few years, so he's going to be a great, kind of Swiss Army knife. But you're already down a starter. You lose a little bit more in that room, and lose a little bit more depth. That could be catastrophic against some high tempo offenses.
Okay. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. What can they take advantage of, in during this stretch of the offseason in the 2026 season?
Yeah, I think compared to last year's schedule to this one, they have some runway to like get catch their stride. With that being said, their 2026 schedule is pretty backloaded. Um, they're gonna be currently the Irish, they're like double digit favorites probably, or at least will be in their first like 6 games. So this is like I said, this is a massive opportunity to build that Heisman resume for CJ Carr, get that young wide receiver room kind of like confident, get those running backs into a lather, before those heavy hitters arrive in the second part of the season. And so yeah, that's the opportunity that I think Notre Dame needs to take advantage of.
Mhm.
The second thing is, so Mike Denrock, the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, he now has the players to match the vision of what he brought into Notre Dame, right? So he has that deep threat. So he has a deep threat freshman. I'm going to talk about him a little bit later. Devin Fitzgerald, son of Larry Fitzgerald, and also he's got Jaden Greathouse, right? So and he's healthy. So they can. They last year, we keep talking about the running backs. They can move from a run to set up the pass to a real like spread and shred type of attack. A spread, a real spread offense. So that'll be something different than what we're used to seeing for Notre Dame. But they have that's his vision. That's the offensive coordinator's vision, and they can do that this year. So that's something that I'm hoping that they do take advantage of. That'll be fun to see.
Wow, wow. So sounds like the chance to really, have an offense that's explosive, just explosive in different areas this year, opposed to
Yeah,
that running back tandem they had, right?
yeah,
Um, anything that could potentially derail this master game plan.
for sure. So right now, I mean, we'll call it like a Miami. th- they have a Miami problem, maybe. So, they later in the season, like I said, they have games against BYU. They have game. So okay, Saturday, October 17th at BYU. Then they play Navy, whatever. Then right after that, they play Miami at home. And then a couple weeks after that, they play SMU. So like in the middle of that, they have Miami, but they have BYU before that. Like they lost to Miami was the bane of their existence last year. Are they looking too far ahead? Are they going to be able to focus on BYU? The Bears coming, or at least they're going into the Bears' house for that one. So they got a lot going on in that second half of the season, and that game with Miami, it will be a battle.
Hmm.
And if they lose this one again, like how is the committee going to treat them? I know there's certain rules about Notre Dame automatically making it to blah 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 whatever. But I think that Miami game will be that make or break season for Notre Dame. Miami has become like Ohio State's Michigan and vice versa over the last 18 months or so.
Yep.
Um, So yeah, I do want to shout out. So I mentioned Devin Fitzgerald a little while ago. I do want to shout out that he is the newcomer to watch for this team, in my opinion. Like I said, he's the son of Larry Fitzgerald, NFL legend, and so but he was already like the star of the receiving core this for this game. A lot of times when you're the son of a great star, like you don't pan out. I think you're like one end of the spectrum. You're either like not even interested in the sport or you're super great. And I think Devin Fitzgerald is going to be on the latter end. He had a 28-yard touchdown. He had 3 catches for 54 yards, so he led the team for that one. And so I think he's gonna be a high point threat. He's gonna have he has elite hands, and he's already forcing his way up the depth chart. And I don't know, by week 1, he could be his favorite target already. So keep an eye out for Devin Fitzgerald at Notre Dame.
Wow, wow, okay. It's pretty cool to see the connection there, man. Grew up watching Larry
Yeah,
Fitzgerald, yeah.
right. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds good. So that's everything that we had for today. Appreciate you guys watching. We'll be back next week with another episode. Like, share, subscribe, do all the good stuff to help out this channel, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.